This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty.
Hey everybody, welcome back to A Little Bit Culty. We're going to Greek life again.
We are welcoming Lucy Taylor back on the show to tell us about the latest developments on college campuses nationwide when it comes to the movement to abolish Greek life. If you haven't heard our first episode with her, definitely check it out. It'll be in our show notes. It's called My So-Called Greek Life. Culty Greek Life. It's time for you to rethink your entire paradigm. And if you are one of those proud Greek life alum and loved it, good for you, truly, from the bottom of our hearts. But if you really loved it that much, you should also maybe listen with an open mind and be part of rooting out some of its worst problems.
And evolving it the way the Greeks would. So just to recap Lucy's story for you guys. As a first-year student at the University of Maryland, Lucy welcomed the sisterhood and built-in community that Greek life promised. But after accepting a bid into a top-tier sorority, she left after 7 months inside a toxic stew of rampant sexual assault, slut-shaming, misogyny, and racism. Lucy shared her experience in Season 1 of her podcast, Snapped. And after an outpouring of responses, she's been continuing to use the series to help other former sorority and fraternity members share their all-too-similar and all too horrific stories. Think Penn State.
She's back with us now in this episode to cover what's happened since we first had her on the show, and in particular to discuss a horrible story out of a well-known university and why she wants you to support the Stop Campus Hazing Act. Please be warned that this episode gets into gritty territory and listening to conversations like this can be triggering. So please, dear listeners, listen with care. Here's our interview with Lucy Taylor. How are you doing? How is Lucy doing?
Lucy is doing well. I just got back from Maryland. I went on a mini press tour where I spoke with different media outlets about the current shutdown at UMD.
How do you feel about that?
I feel excited because the topic has become relevant again. I know in 2020, the Abolish Greek Life movement was very relevant, but it really died down since then. And so I think that this has been a good opportunity to start speaking up in the media. And if they're going to give me a platform, I'll use it.
Good for you.
Are you allowed to say what happened? Do they know yet what happened? I know that everything shut down, but they weren't saying why.
Yeah, so they're not saying why yet. There's, of course, rumors circling around. People have DM'd me different things. The biggest rumor, and again, this is just a rumor, not confirmed, but the rumor that everyone's saying is that someone was forced to eat shit. So,
Jesus.
like in a frat, which I definitely believe because frats love to make people eat things. And I wouldn't be surprised if they just got a little more creative with it. But the university did say that it wasn't one specific incident that led to this shutdown. So who knows really what it is, but I wish that they were being more transparent about it.
Well, we were really excited because, you know, so much of the people's advocacy that occurs after people wake up and leave organizations or institutions or groups or cults or sororities or whatever is, there's advocacy and then not much action. And I know that's been a big part of your fight. So what's it feel like to see this happening right now?
It's interesting to see this happening right now because I've never seen the university or any university that I've heard of. I've never seen them take this action where they shut them all down. Usually they just will suspend one frat or sorority at a time, but to shut the whole, white Greek life system down is a new tactic. But I also am fearful because I don't trust that the university will get answers because these organizations will protect each other at all costs, and the members will protect each other at all costs. And so I don't know how truthful they'll be in this investigation. And I feel as though in a month or two, it'll be like 1 or 2 frats were kicked off and then it's business as usual. So there definitely is this feeling of I don't really trust what's going to happen.
Also, there's a feeling of we've been here before with the fraternities, right? In our last episode, I remember some of our conversations. I remember this going on when I was in college, and the fraternity structure was being threatened, maybe a little earthquake, but they've come back and restored the traditional paradigm. And I guess this might be the lip service to the abuse, but not necessarily overall change. I know in our last interviews too, I asked you if there's any hope for the Greek life, and you don't believe there is, and you don't think this is going to do much. What progress do you think ultimately is going to come from this? And do you think it's just going to be the same? Like, we'll be here again in 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have been trying to reform this system for years and years. There's been these waves of pushback, but then it goes away because students cycle through, they get a new batch of freshmen, and the cycle continues. So, yeah, I really don't see much progress happening. I think that if reform was possible, we wouldn't be here right now. And I think that they'll probably, one thing they did in the past has been to change pledge master to new member educator, change the wording on things, or say like, oh, it's no longer called pledging, it's now called new member education. They do these little things to make it seem like reform is happening and change is happening. And these are now rebranded organizations. Some might even become alcohol free, or will say that they are alcohol free. But I just want to remind everyone that the frat that ended up killing Tim Piazza out of negligence was a so-called reformed fraternity, and they were allegedly alcohol free, and they had won chapter of the year. So I really just don't think reform is possible.
And for those listening who are new to this podcast, please do listen to our episode about Tim Piazza and also our initial episode with Lucy that will encapsulate a lot of those details. Let's go back just to bring our listeners up to speed. In your podcast, Snapped, which delves into the dark realities of fraternity hazing, particularly in episodes like The H Word, Part 1 and 2, what initially inspired you to shine a spotlight on the issue of hazing specifically?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the interview journey, I would interview anyone who I could get. I wasn't really looking for anything specific. I was just like, okay, who's going to talk? Because it's hard to get people to talk anyway. And one of my first interviews was with a fraternity president who was trying to get hazing removed from his chapter. And he was not able to do so. His chapter pushed back and wanted to keep hazing as part of their model. And a few weeks after our interview, he retracted his interview and said he actually doesn't want this out there. Even though he's anonymous in it, he really just does not want to get his frat into trouble. So that was the first time I really saw that how much no one wants to talk about this and how scared people are of the backlash. And even in some of my other interviews that weren't about hazing, if I even slipped in the word hazing, the frat brother would squirm. And this was very interesting to me because it's such an open secret. Everyone knows it's happening, but then they like to pretend that it's not because out of fear of getting in trouble. And so that's why the episodes about hazing are called the H word, because no one wants to say hazing.
Can you just for anyone who's maybe living under a rock or doesn't know what hazing is, can you just define it? What does it entail? What could it look like?
Yeah.
Paint a picture for us.
For sure. So hazing, I would say, is any act that you are coerced into that might endanger you or humiliate you or make you uncomfortable in any way. And it's usually hazing is done when you are a new member to an organization. So in sororities and fraternities, you are a pledge, or they can call it new member if they want to seem reformed. But essentially,
fresh blood.
Right. Oftentimes it starts off small. So a lot of the times people don't even consider certain things to be hazing. Like one thing that the fraternities do is they go around on campus, they go around to the sororities on campus and will serenade them. And I remember when I was in a sorority, I saw this happen and I was like, oh, that's so cute. That's so funny. And a lot of hazing can seem maybe funny from afar. And oftentimes this hazing is not even looked at as hazing because hazing is a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And the small things like serenades or cleaning the fraternity houses that might not be like traumatizing oftentimes leads into the more brutal hazing where you're being lined up and you're forced to do push-ups, or you're being waterboarded, or you're forced to eat a bunch of shit. Like there are so many things that frats do with hazing. There's too many examples to list. But with sororities, for example, one thing that I didn't see as hazing until after the fact was that we had to sit in a circle and disclose our deepest, darkest trauma to each other, like a room full of 40 18-year-olds. And we're all just like crying, offering up our worst trauma, and that we just met each other. And at the time, I'm like, wow, I'm getting so close with my sisters. Mm-hmm. But looking back at it, it's hazing.
It's hazing and also trauma bonding.
The thing that's so tricky about it, like you said, it's an open secret. And when I had a couple fraternities approach me, and my whole philosophy is I'm just not going to take shit from guys I don't like. Like I'd been in the jock culture enough to know I just don't need another group of guys that. There was one example. There was one guy that was pledging. They got a phone call at like 2 a.m. He always had to be on call during his pledge. And one of the guys called him over, and he went over there and he's like, hand me my remote. And he had to hand him his remote and then go back to bed. It was like across campus. So that kind of seems funny, like when you say it, because it's stupid and silly, but I just wasn't going to do that crap, And I remember my dad was telling me he was in a frat, when he was in college, and like they made guys eat sticks of butter. It's juvenile stuff that kind of can get the hall pass of boys will be boys, but it's really
it's testing your obedience.
It's testing your obedience, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
And for me, that just never seemed like fun.
Yeah. So, well, I of course see everything through the lens of how is this culty, and it's an initiation.
It's a humiliation.
It's a humiliation and initiation process to test your loyalty and your commitment. And if you want to be part of the group, which is the thing that I see so rampantly in sororities and fraternities, is it's preying on that desire and natural need to belong and be part of community and say, yes, you can have it, but you have to do X, Y, and Z first.
It's like branding.
It is. Well, some fraternities do brand.
They do brand.
They do.
Yeah. As was so told to me when I tried to blow the whistle. Well.
So how do you break the secrecy? How do you inspire people to?
Especially when they're afraid of the backlash.
Yeah. What's the hopeful anecdote there, I guess?
Right. Well, in order to break the secrecy, ideally, you would get rid of the dynamics that create the secrecy, which are in Greek life, there's power positions, and everything is supposed to be handled internally so that nothing has to get out to the school or whoever else. And so, I just don't think that any more oversight will help, because I think that the more oversight there is, the less willing people are to talk. And then the less willing people will be to call the ambulance when inevitably something does go wrong. Someone falls down the stairs, someone drinks too much, needs to go to the hospital. And this is then what leads to death, because no one wants to call for help, because no one wants to be the one that gets their frat kicked off campus. And then in the moment, like, they're willing to take that chance. It doesn't, you feel invincible and think that no one will die, but people die over and over again. So I think the only thing to really remove that secrecy is to remove the organizations themselves.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
I'll never forget how I felt at the pain in my body listening to your recap of what happened to Tim Piazza and how there were so many opportunities for someone to call to get help, and why the social pressure to not be the rat prevented that is just horrific. That's a peer pressure that has such life-altering consequences. And Nippy and I were talking about this last night as we were getting ready for bed, and I said, you know what, I can't talk about this right now because I'm not going to be able to sleep because of being the mom of two boys and picturing something like this. It's just horrific. And it still boggles my mind that this is happening across America, as I'm sure it's in Canada too, but it wasn't on my radar.
There's not a lot of Greek life in Canada.
Well, there are. No, there were fraternities
Really?
and sororities. Oh, yeah, there were. But it wasn't where I went to school. It wasn't a big thing there.
Well, it's an annual event. It's not like this is it's like this happens every year in college campuses.
Literally.
It's like traditional.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking about relating to all the other episodes we've done, specifically where, like in the Mormon Church and Jehovah's Witness, and specifically, you don't call the police. You don't reach out for help outside the community. You can't shine light, get that kind of authority attention on the community. It's this exact same thing. And it's so obvious to me.
And then not only that, but you also can't really critique the group within the group. So saying that this is wrong is hard even to do within the group.
Right. And the secrecy that's enforced, like with Tim Piazza at Penn State and Tucker Hips at Clemson, all the fraternity brothers maintaining that secrecy then hinders the investigations, just like with so many other cases we've seen. Has there been any advances or anything that's come out of those cases? And has it progressed? Are you in touch with Tim's mom still?
No, I'm not in touch with her, but I've been following the case. And the last I heard is that the two that have yet to be sentenced, apparently that might happen in September is the last I heard, but still no one has seen jail time or, faced any real consequences.
What's that like for you?
I mean, at this point, it's not shocking because I've looked into a lot of different fraternity hazing cases, and it's very rare for them to go to jail. And when they do go to jail, it's more like 15 days or 30 days. So it really, at this point, I feel a bit numb to it.
Yeah.
But of course, I can't even imagine what it's like for Evelyn Piazza and all these other mothers out here. And some of these mothers are still trying to even figure out what happened to their son, because in Tim Piazza's case, they had a video recording of the entire night or most of the night. And they actually deleted that video recording as part of the cover up, but the FBI recovered it. And so I can't even imagine that in a case where there's video recording, no one sees jail time. I can't even imagine the other cases where they don't have the video recording and then it's the brother's word against, I don't know. It's just, you just have to rely on what the brothers are saying. And in cases with Tucker Hips, still to this day, it is an unsolved case because the brothers who were there when Tucker died will not say what happened.
Can you summarize that case? We haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to read from my notes because got to be careful with my wording on this one.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing. You've got to be careful with your wording.
So Tucker Hips died in 2014. He fell off of a bridge, and it's still a mystery as to what happened. According to court documents from the family's wrongful death lawsuit against Clemson, a witness said Tucker fell when he was forced to walk the bridge railing as a punishment for failing to bring breakfast biscuits for other students on the run. So they were on like a pledge class run, and something happened. There was some sort of altercation, and he was found in a lake. The witness further alleges that Hips's brothers attempted to locate him in the waters using a light from a cell phone, but that no attempt was made to rescue him. This was in 2014, and still no one has come forward. There's a $100,000 reward for anyone who does come forward. And the most interesting part of this case to me is that the one who was accused of organizing the alleged hazing event is the son of John Carney, who is the governor of Delaware. And at the time, he was a 3-term Democratic congressman from Delaware. And so I just find that very interesting. And no charges have ever been filed in Tucker's death. And those 29 boys are still keeping a secret.
Without getting yourself in trouble, where do you feel that privilege plays into this dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that if you're the son of the eventual governor of Delaware and I guess congressman at the time, I would assume that you have some pretty good connections. I mean, I know that John Carney is buddies with Biden. Like, he's at the top of the government. So I would assume there's some good connects there. And membership in a frat, in order to be a member, you already need to be part of a very elite circle. I guess you don't, you need to have money at least, or your family needs to have money because you're paying dues, which start at usually around $700 a semester up to $2,000 a semester, depending on what frat or sorority you're in. And so you're already the richest white kids on campus, basically building an army where you can then protect each other and do favors for each other. And, oh, this guy's dad is a lawyer and blah, blah, blah. They have a network that can exist to protect them. And then also after the fact, they have connections to get jobs. Mm-hmm. So I know Cordell mentioned, who I interviewed in the Tim Piazza case, who was one of the witnesses to the event and tried to call for help. He mentioned that the pledge master and the former pledge master, now have jobs on Wall Street, allegedly, and, are just living their lives. Mm-hmm. So to me, this was very shocking when I first heard that, but it makes complete sense. These really are rich white kids with connects. And so, of course.
Since obviously no one from that camp is going to take responsibility, what can you do with the universities? What's the university's responsibility, and what recourse do people have going through the universities, and how inspired or incentivized are they to clean this up from your perspective?
From my perspective, they want to keep these groups through and through. I mean, the alumni donations from these groups are higher. Like people, if you were in a sorority or fraternity, you're apparently more likely to donate. And for them, it really seems like it's all about the money.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that going through the school helps, because at worst, and through the lens of someone who's in a fraternity, at worst, they're going to kick them off campus. And another scenario would be that they don't get kicked off campus, but you then just get hazed more because someone in the pledge class snitched. And they're going to then try and figure out who in the pledge class snitched. And then it turns into, you're getting waterboarded. Like, it really does not seem appealing to go to the school.
Sounds like a gang.
Yeah, well, also, is it fair to say that there are these clubs on campuses that in a lot of ways are the selling points for the universities, and the universities need them in order to secure their bags?
Yeah.
So if you take those off, you lose that asset. It's almost like an asset class for the universities in some ways.
For sure. And that's why society's opinion really needs to flip when it comes to these organizations. Mm-hmm. And so that it seems like an asset if they don't have Greek life at their school. I know that if I had a son or a daughter, I would only be paying for schools that don't have Greek life.
Yeah. For me, when I went to college, I just did not care about any of that.
And would you want, because I don't really know how it works when there is such a high presence of Greek life, even if they're not in the sorority fraternity, you just don't even want them on the campus.
Right, because they dominate the social scene.
Right. They have all the parties and...
They have all the parties. They control the underage drinking scene. And frat men are 3 times more likely to rape than non-fraternity men. And it's just not a positive presence on campus. It isolates and alienates other students.
Yep.
It holds, an entire fraternity row of space for the students who are already the most privileged. And it offers resources to students who are already the most privileged. It's time to create spaces on campus that are for the entire community and not just students that can afford $1,000 a semester.
It's a microcosm of our culture.
Exactly. I was just thinking that. I was just like, every time I talk to you, I get more riled up. If universities or society at large were to see that these groups run and operate in the same way as a gang, based on what you just said, and a cult, why do they exist?
So, Lucy, just to give you a little context, like, Sarah and I are kicking around, or at least I'm kicking around the idea of homeschooling, because I'm looking at these schools and a lot of the education systems don't have the minerals to stand up to these groups. And if they can't be pioneers and leaders in standing up to these factions of people, how are they going to teach my son to do that? And I just, for someone who's been through standing up to something and knowing what it takes, I'm certainly going to pass it on to my kids, and I'm not going to drop them off into school where I'm paying money for them to learn the opposite of what I'm teaching them. So we're a little bit of a crossroads. It's not big yet, but like that to me seems the problem with their education system. They're educating them to be obedient to these groups, and it chaps my ass, dare I say. Anyway, that's my rant.
That chaps my ass too.
Anything else chapping your ass since we spoke last?
Well, it's chapping my ass that people are acting like the idea of Greek life being taken away is like against their human rights. Mm-hmm. And like that they're like these victims that are like, oh, you're taking my binge drinking away.
And they're going to cling. They're going to cling to some faux principle, and then you're going to have to expose how none of their behaviors are in line with those principles. And then ultimately it's going to become obvious that you're the one that actually embodies the principles they're pretending to champion. And then once that discrepancy is obvious to everyone, I think it becomes, okay, we have to now cede to this person because they're clearly putting themselves through the ringer to uphold the principles, and we're not. And look, that's a process. And I think give yourself credit for what you've done so far. You're obviously doing something right. My question to you now is, from the links that I watch and when I'm reading, I feel like you're a one-person army. Do you have help? Do you have a wingman, so to speak, or a wingwoman? Who do you have advocating for you?
Who?
My co-producer, Megan Thompson. She has been with the podcast since day 0. She was my roommate in college. And so she's seen all of this develop. And she was there at the interviews with me and is always taking it upon herself to have my back. So I definitely have a small little support close with me. And then I have a lot of support within the Snaps community, mostly social media support. I wish it was more in person. I would love for there to be some sort of protest of sorts, but I don't know if there's enough people, or if, I don't know, people are hesitant.
Yeah. Is there anyone on campus? I think if you can make an example of one university, that can be a template to go into other universities and get the person the conscience of the university. Would that be an option, or do you have? I'm just spitballing here. I don't know.
For one university to shut it down?
Yeah, like you've gotten Maryland to shut it down for how long?
Well, I didn't get them to shut it down.
Well, you participated in it, I'm sure.
I don't know.
Really?
I don't know if I did. Yeah.
It's crumbled on its own?
Yeah, it's crumbled on its own.
I think you probably participated in ways you don't know yet.
There is always that. These things do crumble on their own. But at what cost, right? Because it seems to be there has to be, I've always said there has to be something in the physical realm for people to respond. But the physical incident or abuse is a manifestation of a lot of emotional abuse, hazing in this case, that's gone on for a long time. And by the time something's shut down, something egregious has been going on for a long time.
Yeah,
right? So I wonder if you could capitalize on what's going on at Maryland and make it an example in other universities. I don't know. It just seems to me like this is something that's been going on for a while, even when I was applying to schools. And so
that was before you were born, by the way.
Thanks, Sarah.
I just don't think that the universities want the truth. I messaged the University of Maryland. I called them, and they declined to meet with me.
Wow.
And so I don't think that they're on board with the mission.
So I can't imagine that your work hasn't had an impact. Like, it may not be the reason that they shut it down right now, but if they said that's for multiple reasons, I'm sure you and your advocacy is part of that. Like, I can't imagine how that would be not an effect. I'm dying to know what happened, and I'm sure our listeners will want to know as you find out. So please promise to circle back with us so we can update.
Yeah, we'll keep updating, because this is something the education institutions in our country right now, to me, I'm sus.
So sus.
So sus.
It's incredible that goes against the whole mission of learning.
Covered.
Yeah. I mean,
don't learn, be obedient, eat shit.
Right.
And pay us to do it.
Big money.
For more background on what brought us here, check out my page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And if you want to see that story in streaming form, you can watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
So your advocacy has included supporting the Stop Campus Hazing Act, which aims to enforce transparency about hazing incidents on campuses, but you've also mentioned feeling conflicted about the potential effectiveness of legislative measures like the Stop Campus Hazing Act. Can you elaborate on your concerns and discuss what broader changes you believe are needed to address the root causes of hazing culture?
For sure. So I think that the Stop Campus Hazing Act would be great, but that's the bare minimum to me. So one of the things that the Stop Campus Hazing Act would do is that it would improve hazing reporting by requiring colleges to include hazing incidents in their annual security report. And to me, this is just the bare minimum. I mean, the fact that this is like a controversial thing, the fact that this hasn't been passed yet is absurd to me. And the transparency should be offered. And to me, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it somehow is. I'm in total support of the Stop Campus Hazing Act, but it can't
stop there.
Yeah, I can't stop there, and I'm flabbergasted that it hasn't been passed yet. This has been an ongoing saga to get this bill passed. These poor parents have banded together, parents who have lost their sons to hazing, have banded together to get this act passed. They've gone to DC, they've done it all, and still there's nothing. And there's no federal law against hazing right now. And Greek organizations have even lobbied against potential federal laws against hazing in the past. So they don't want it seems that they don't want there to be a federal law against hazing, which is questionable. But I think that a big part of the issue also is that we're placing the blame on students. We're putting all the responsibility on the hazers. And I think that doing so ignores the fact that they were once hazed and have become the perpetrators, which I'm not excusing their actions, but we're not paying attention to the fact that it's the university's responsibility to protect students and not put them in situations where it's like the Stanford prison experiment and someone's a pledge master and has that power and control to now have full authority over the pledges. And so I think it needs to be the universities and the national fraternities and sororities who are the ones facing consequences, because they operate like organized crime organizations.
Yep. They've basically have institutions on campus that are supposed to educate you, but they have systems that have normalized abuse and then created kids to normalize abuse. That's in essence what they've done.
Yeah, and one of the links you sent us,
and then
which
ignore it when you hold them accountable.
We'll include in our show notes. I heard them say that the university said they have no tolerance for anything that threatens student safety. How is that to hear that when you hear that and then you see the actions? How does that feel?
I think it's so funny in a sick way. For the H word part 1, the first episode that I did about hazing, how the episode opens is the universities are making all these statements and the frats are making all these statements. And it's just going completely against what they're saying when it comes to the actions of their members.
Yep.
So if you put it in order of statement and then action, statement and then action, it just does not line up and is almost humorous to me because I just can't believe that they believe what they're saying. I just wonder about the person who has to write those statements. And I'm just like, what are they thinking? Do they genuinely believe that? Because there's just no way.
Every time I talk to you, I have a new level of awareness. Like, I don't know if you know this, that with words being changed to be more inclusive, aware, like you can't even say master bedroom anymore. It's the owner's suite. Like the fact that they could even say pledge master to me.
It's
and we
shocking.
We had slaves and masters in DOS. Like
changing language and all that stuff is
that's what I'm saying.
Performative.
I'm saying that changing the language isn't going to fix it. You're changing the words to try to make it better, but it's not going to change the dynamic. Is what I'm saying. And again, every time I talk to you, I get more riled up. I see more correlations. I have to tell you, every time we do this, everybody's very empathetic to you. They believe you in terms of our audience, at least. And they rally for you some more than others because of their own, sometimes, positive experience. And to that, I say, I'm glad that you had a positive experience.
People took a 5-day and had a positive
Yeah, lots of people
did
our training. And we say this and I'm going to say it again for our
both can be true.
For all our sorority and fraternity advocates out there listening, it can't be all bad all the time. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. We're looking at the bad stuff here. We're looking at the negative. We're looking at the destructive. If you had a good experience, please don't let that dim Lucy's voice because we have to look at this stuff. How would I say this to a listener who's feeling defensive about their sorority and their little circle of girlfriends that drink mimosas and go on girls' trips? I'm thrilled for you. I really am. No, I am. If one of their children died in a fraternity or a sorority, how would they feel? And that's empathy. And I've been going on some rants lately because all of
rants.
Well, I feel like it's really insensitive, and I'm calling it out before it happens. So
I appreciate that. I also want to ask those people who might be feeling defensive, why equate those friendships that you've made, which I believe are amazing friendships. Like, hell yeah, I love that. But why do they have to be equated to the organization? If I joined a normal golf club or something, and then the golf club ended up being really bad, but I met a best friend there, I just don't see myself
needing to thank the golf club.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. You can maintain your friendships from your whatever frat or sorority. You don't have to attribute the success of the friendship to that. That's a good point. And I see that actually with a lot of ex-members of specifically NXIVM. They don't want to denounce NXIVM because they think they're going to lose their community. And what they don't know is that the community is even stronger on the other side, actually, for the 10 people who are still remaining loyal to Keith.
And not listening to our podcast.
May or may not be listening to this podcast. But if you are, consider
that. Is it
that.
10? Is that an accurate
There's
number?
10 to 20 maybe. We don't know for sure. They're continuing to still drop out, but there's a devoted circle who will probably never renounce them because they do not have the strength or the internal ethics to evaluate that maybe they were wrong.
Right.
It's hard. It's hard when you dedicate your life to something. And I do get it. I do get that for the people who really, for whatever reason had a positive experience and they dedicated their life and a lot of money. It is hard to go, oh shit, was I part of something bad? It's easier to say, well, my experience was good.
100%.
But it still sucks, doesn't it? To not have their support.
Here we are, I guess a year and change later, and you're still at it, and there's progress made. So I'll say to you what I said in the last podcast: keep doing what you're doing, and keep us posted. And great work. Your podcast is great.
You.
It is. It's so good. It's so well produced.
Well done. Everyone, check it out.
And one of our dearest fans and supporters, Tony Wormold, wrote to us. I told our group that we were interviewing you again, and she said, I love your podcast. Please ask her how she has the strength to keep fighting against these organizations. It must have been so hard.
Because I'm so removed from it myself at this point, and I've also heard every response in the book, I'm just numb to those responses, and I see each response at face value. I can consider the different stages of life that they're in, and I just don't take it personally. I really is just awareness. The more that I've learned about these organizations, the more confident I am in my stance.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes you're right. I feel like I'm right. And I'll just keep talking because I'm just so confident in what I'm saying, especially after the research I've done and the people I've interviewed.
Yeah. There's no lack of evidence of what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else you want our audience to know? Any big takeaways we didn't cover?
Well, Alpha Phi did send a cease and desist. That's an update.
Oh, that's right.
All right.
Yeah. But
that's progress.
That was handled pro bono. God bless. But yeah, that just shows that they do not want anything negative out there and they're willing to silence people. And luckily, just because something is on a PDF doesn't make it real. Like, it's just because they sent a cease and desist doesn't mean that I was doing anything wrong.
No.
So I would tell people to watch out and check on their cease and desists if they get any, because just because it's on a PDF doesn't mean you have to follow what they're saying.
Yeah, little saber rattling. Yeah.
It's a little threatening.
Yeah.
A little bit culty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A little
culty tactic.
Dare I say.
Right. And it came from the director of accountability.
The DOA.
Like straight from Alpha Phi International, the director of accountability. God bless.
Great.
Did you write back saying, I'm so glad that you're taking accountability by writing a cease and desist letter?
No.
You should have signed it director of accountability.
No, seriously.
Hashtag eat shit.
Right.
There you go. Getting in on the theme a little bit there. That was a callback. That's what comedians call a callback.
Lucy Taylor, thank you for coming thrice onto A Little Bit Culty. Please keep in touch.
Thank you so much. I will. I'll let you know any updates as soon as I get them. We'll see what happens.
And people can find your podcast wherever they listen to podcasts, right?
Wherever they listen.
And find you on the IG at
Snaps the Podcast.
Love it. Bye. You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do.
So that was Lucy Taylor, and coming up next, we'll drop a conversation with her that we had originally aired as a Patreon episode with more context for you about the cases we discussed. So keep an eye out and ears out for that as well.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with new episodes.
And until then, let's not do any pledging or any rushing for any fraternities or sororities.
Or branding, for that matter. Thanks, everybody. See you soon on A Little Bit Culty.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/alittlebitculty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources, and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain / bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.